Thank you. Maria, do we have a quorum? Not yet. Okay. Not yet. Who's on? Who's on? Yeah, okay. Oh, he's here. Oh, great. Thanks. Quorum.
Thank you for participating in today's meeting. If attending in person, please do not connect to Zoom or teleconference while in the room, and please silence all devices. If translation is provided, click on the globe at the bottom of your screen to select either English or Spanish. Public comment will be taken after each item. If you're in the auditorium and wish to comment, please use the iPads located in the lobby or complete a blue speaker card as available. If you need assistance, please find a South Coast AQMD employee. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for all agenda items. Times may be shortened to ensure all speakers can be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. More time will be allotted for Spanish translation that is not simultaneous. For questions or issues on making a public comment, please call the public advisor at 909-396-2432. That's 909-396-2432. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being removed from the meeting. Be aware that this meeting is being recorded. By participating, you authorize recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. I see a lot of our staff, Susan, people wearing red in honor of Valentine's Day. I'll call order our hybrid legislative committee meeting of the South Coast Air Quality Management District for Friday, February 14th, 2025. It's 9:05 a.m. And Maria, can you please take the roll?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mayor Log-Dawson, absent. Supervisor Hagman?
Here.
Supervisor Perez? Absent. Councilmember Rahman? Absent. Councilmember Caccioti?
Here.
We do not have a quorum at this time.
Okay. So the first, I only ask staff, first item is the action discussion. Should we come back to that? Because that's needs a motion, Wayne?
Yes, please.
Okay. So with, if that's okay with you, Kurt, we'll move to item number 2. That's an update and discussion on federal legislative issues. Boy, we've got a lot to talk about today. Mark, you ready to go?
Well, I'll make my best effort. Good to see you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'll attempt to give you a brief chronology and status report on the federal freeze that we're now operating under, at least to some extent. And just a brief chronology so everyone's up to speed. I think you know that on Inauguration Day, the president issued an executive order essentially to terminate the Green New Deal. And under that, OMB the next day issued a directive on a pause of federal funding, which initially was to apply to the bill and IRA funds that were awarded under the last administration. About a week later, OMB issued another directive that essentially applied the freeze to a much larger group of funds to see if they were consistent with the president's policy. Approximately $3 trillion by their own account would be affected for this pause. But the chaos and confusion that created the next day forced them to withdraw that requirement and try to issue some guidance of what would not be affected. In the meantime, a number of states' attorney general and a number of groups went to court to sue. And on the 31st of January, were able to get a temporary restraining order from a judge in Rhode Island saying that the administration was not allowed to pause these funds under the executive order. So the next week, OMB issued some more clarification, and EPA put out on the 7th of February, a memo saying that it was going to pause funds not based on the executive order, but based on their own review for compliance. The federal judge that had ruled previously reviewed that and said that in fact that was not legal and that the temporary restraining order was now an enforcement action, that the federal government should release all funds and were not able to withhold, are not allowed to withhold federal funds the way they're doing it. That was on the 10th. For the last week now, we have not gotten any clarification about which funds are held or not, frozen or not frozen. Some funds have been released, others have not. The judge's latest order, interestingly, applies not just to the general federal funds, but specifically, he called out bill and IRA funds, which, as you know, funded programs in Southern California like Clean Ports, and for us, the CPRG grant, etc. So I guess the status report is we're still in a state of flux. There's a lot of uncertainty. The courts have made a decision that's been appealed. The administration is continuing to argue that it has authority to do this freeze. So I don't know how that will play out. I think it will play out obviously in the courts over the short term. But it's clearly, I think it appears to be part of a larger issue where the head of OMB and this administration believe that the restrictions on the president to impound federal funds that Congress have appropriated, in their view, is unconstitutional. And they're looking for a fight, I think, to make that happen. Russ Vought, who's the head of OMB, essentially testified during his confirmation hearing that he thought it was unconstitutional, and the president had the authority to freeze funds when he saw it was inconsistent with his policy. So this puts us in a position where some federal funds appear to have been released, others are frozen, but the administration is not talking to folks about why they're freezing certain funds, under what authority, and what their concerns are. So it's a very tenuous time at the moment and a lot of confusion. So I wish I could answer questions to clarify more, but I think we're gonna have to see how this plays out in the court.
Thank you, Mark. Kurt, any questions? Maybe Mark, you, Gary, or Leo can talk about this. As I was driving in today on KNX about 20 minutes ago, Kurt, they had a little segment about Lee Zeldin and EPA said he was now withholding another $20 billion for certain funding from the IRA. I'm not sure that's associated with this. And there was a quote that some former employees of EPA likened it to the Titanic sinking, and people on the Titanic were throwing out gold bars. So did you hear that? Have you heard that, or any idea what's going on with that?
I did not. I don't know if you
Yes,
have.
I'm aware of that. I could talk to that, Chairman. Thank you. This is Gary with the Karma Group. Back in December, there was an undercover video released by one of the conservative groups of the someone talking from the EPA, from the Obama EPA, from the Biden EPA, saying that they were pushing dollars out the door very quickly, and he likened it to throwing gold bars off the Titanic as the administration was sinking, and they wanted to get the money out before the Trump administration came in. Lee Zeldin, as the new EPA director, the other day just put out a little statement that he's found what he says. He's claiming he found the gold bars, and he's saying that he's found that there's been $20 billion that has been ensconced in an entity and entities beyond the EPA. And now what he's talking about, and which we've researched, is he's talking about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And this is something I've written about in my reports over time, that the EPA had set up under Biden a situation where some of this climate money would go to non-governmental entities that are essentially banks that would have authority to then release the money to specific projects over future years. So the money would be outside of the EPA and it would be under the control of these NGOs in effect. So what Zeldin is saying, he wants to pull that money back. Now, this is going to get into a legal fight, whether that's even possible, but that's in essentially what they're talking about.
Thanks, Gary. Kurt, did you have any, Gary, you want to go on with your report? Sorry, things are jumping in.
Yeah, sure. I just want to give a brief update on the status of the Trump nominees, the cabinet nominees. We're watching that very closely, of course. Of the 22 cabinet level nominees out there, there's 16 now that have been formally confirmed by the Senate. And the Trump people feel very good about that. The pace is going very well from their standpoint. No nominees have been rejected. And of course, the 4 that we are most concerned about looking at have passed, and that is Lee Zeldin at the EPA, the former congressman, former Congressman Sean Duffy at Department of Transportation, Chris Wright, the former energy CEO from Denver. He's in as Department of Energy Secretary. And of course, Russ Vought at the OMB is in there. He's going to be a critical player, as Mark was just saying, in terms of this DOGE effort and everything else that's going on with the funding. So those are the ones we're looking at closely. They were mostly party line votes, but I would just point out that Duffy was the one that was much more bipartisan and did get the support of both California senators. We're also looking at a number of sub-cabinet nominees that are coming, that have been submitted. Their nominations have been submitted. They all have to be confirmed by the Senate as well. That's going to take some weeks and months likely to get through a lot of those, but we're keeping an eye on them. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll just leave it there.
Supervisor? Okay, great. We'll go on to Leo. Go ahead, Leo.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. I'm going to give you all a quick update on the budget reconciliation and the ongoing continuing funding resolution issues that are going on in Washington. First things first, on the budget reconciliation process, both the House and Senate budget committees managed to advance budget reconciliation measures with instructions to their committees. They are very much apart still, though. The House approved a massive budget reconciliation that would allow $1.5 to $2 trillion in spending cuts, while allowing $4.5 trillion in tax cuts over the next 10 years. They also did move to increase the debt limit in that vehicle by $4 trillion. In contrast, the Senate Budget Committee passed a much smaller, skinny budget resolution focused on defense, border security, and energy that allowed for $300 billion in spending over 4 years. Those spending cuts would be offset by increases in energy energy spending. The House is out for the next 10 days. They are looking to have this on the floor shortly after they return with instructions for committees to report back legislation with a target date of March 27th. The Senate is in session next week. They will be processing nominees, as Gary said. I think the Deputy Secretary of Transportation is having his hearing, but much of the work on the Senate floor, if things come together, will focus on advancing the Senate budget reconciliation process. They have instructed committees to report back if the resolution is passed by March 7th. With that, I'll pause for questions on the budget reconciliation, and if not, I just have a short update on the CR that expires on March 14th.
Thanks, Leo. I don't see any questions from Supervisor. Go ahead.
Just a comment. Normally, we get these updates because they have a really big insight of what's going on. we're getting the same thing in the news because no one knows. It's the same thing we report out every day is a new day. So I feel for you trying to keep up with the day-to-day changes, but it's no crystal ball here. You just have to write it out and see what happens.
You're not wrong there. Every morning, just last night, there was new court decisions. It seems like every morning you wake up to an executive order or a court ruling, or an appeal, where the administration is testing the court's orders or appeals. So we're all just trying to wrap our arms around it the best we can.
Thanks, Leo. Was that concluded?
Just very quickly, CR expires on March 14th. I think everyone wants to know what's going to happen with the budget reconciliation process in the next 2 weeks before they make decisions on whether to tie the CR into another CR, into a larger package that increases the debt ceiling and or includes disaster funding.
Great. Thanks, Leo. Kurt, any questions for staff? My only question on this issue would be, I'd asked Lisa this the other day. Lisa, if you can maybe fill this in. I know, and Wayne mentioned, we try to sometimes access that federal portal for the funds, CPRG. How's that going now? I know that may be a day-to-day thing, or tell us some of your experience in the last week or so, Lisa.
Very much like Leo's report, it's been on again, off again. And at one point we were able to see all of our grants that were authorized by IRA programs. And now I believe currently we can't see any of those programs. So the portal is, even if we can see them, there's reason to believe that we wouldn't even be able to process a drawdown. So.
And let me just ask Bay, as they've mentioned, or Wayne, every time there's an executive order, then there's a lawsuit, and they refer to the case from Rhode Island, which I followed a little bit. The judge made a temporary restraining order, and then there was a follow-up. He made another order saying you're not implementing my temporary restraining order. Can you give us just some background on that, maybe, in addition to what our consultants have provided, if you know?
Yeah, so the case is ongoing, and I think they're constantly assessing what the next steps are going to be. So, yeah, I think we're just going to have to wait and see how it plays out. But the court had ordered all the funds to be released, but he's also taking reports and information on whether or not that's actually occurring. So I think we'll see what comes of that.
And maybe, do we provide him any information to that judge, because that impacts us, doesn't it?
I wouldn't, in an open session, comment on anything that might be attorney-client or otherwise privileged.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, with that, is there any public comment on the item number 2, update on discussion federal legislative issues? Susan, do you see any hands raised online? Anybody in the audience, auditorium, want to speak? Harvey, okay. Harvey, raise your hand. Harvey, go ahead, please. You've got 3 minutes.
Yes, good morning. My name's Harvey Etter. I'm founder director of Public Solar Power Coalition. Speaking for myself and like-minded folks and entities, we're looking to and we want to know what our consultants say about follow-up of trying to get rid of Trump under the 14th Amendment. Special Prosecutor Smith, incorporating by reference this 140-page report, he stepped down. They said they couldn't go after him. Justice couldn't because he was in office. Okay, what's happening with justice in the Congress, in the House and the Senate? And we've been talking with Wiener and Gabriel, a budget committee, about there's $50 million to go after fires and they go after litigation from the state. And Trump, we had 41 million spent 4 years ago, 120 cases, and that the point on this should be enforcing 14th Amendment, and they should not have been put on the ballot. There's invalid decision of the court, et cetera, et cetera. So what's up on this is what is being discussed in Congress and anything, what other states. There's other thing on the 14th Amendment also with birthright and a lot of things that could be networked and leveraged into this. So what's up? And we think that the state of California should do this, and the district, losing all this money and everything. Equity was not considered a lot of these things, but we've got to take point and do this now. What's up? I only used about a minute and a half.
You finished, Harvey?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Supervisor Perez is on. Did you want to make any comments or questions, Manny? Not at this time. Okay, great. And we'll move on to the next item. That's the update on discussion on state legislative issues. And first we have Paul Gonsalves. Paul, would you like to go ahead on that?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. I did want to provide the committee with a brief update to my written report. So as I mentioned in my written report, in early January, Governor Newsom and Democratic leaders reached an agreement to set aside $50 million to cover legal expenses in anticipation of the possible legal battles with the Trump administration. And just to kind of put things in context, during the president's first term, President Trump's first term, California sued the federal government more than 120 times and spent about, 42 million overall in legal battles. So the 50 million is what they're anticipating will be what they need moving forward. So that being in anticipation of history repeating itself. And so the legislature introduced SB 1X1 and SB 1X2 as part of their special sessions. SB 1X1 allocates 25 million to the Department of Justice for litigation efforts. The state is expecting legal challenges over environmental regulations, reproductive rights, protections for the LGBTQ plus community and students, and other key policy areas as well. And then SB 1X2 directs 25 million to provide legal aid for immigration defense, as well as cases involving wage theft, evictions, and workplace protections. So on February 3rd, the Assembly and Senate passed both those bills, SB 1X1 and SB 1X2, and sent them to the governor, who then signed those two bills into law on February 7th. I do want to note that there was some concerns raised around the possibility of these funds being used to provide legal services to non-citizens who were convicted of a serious or violent felony. The governor, in his signing message on SB 1X2, did clarify that these funds are not intended to be used for that purpose, and said that if further clarification is needed, that he encourages the legislature to pass subsequent legislation to clarify that. So as always, we will continue to keep you apprised as this issue progresses. And as Supervisor Hagman said, there's really no crystal ball to look forward to see, how things are going to play out. It's going to be a very interesting year, and we'll continue to keep you guys all apprised of that. So that completes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Paul. Supervisors?
Paul, I just want to say for once, Sacramento looks normal for once in comparison.
Supervisor Perez, any questions or for Paul? Then we'll move on to David Quintana. Oh, go on, Manny. Sorry.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. David?
Good morning, Chair. This is Alfredo Redondo. I'm filling in for my partner, David Quintana, who unfortunately had to be on a flight this morning. So just a very brief update to our written report. We have good news in that Assemblymember Philip Chen has agreed to author the South Coast AQMD sponsored legislation dealing with fair compensation for AQMD members that serve on the CARB board. We expect to see that introduced imminently, either today or early next week after the holiday weekend. And with that, I'll happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Alfredo. Supervisor Perez, Hagman? Good. Okay. Then I'll open it up to public comment on this item. Update discussion on state legislative issues. So if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Harvey's got his hand up. How much time does Harvey get?
He has 1 minute and approximately 30 or 39 seconds remaining for items for these agendized items.
Thanks, Bay. Harvey, go ahead, please. Harvey, you're muted.
Hello, good morning. I'm Harvey Etter. Ditto what I said before. I only talked for half a minute. Okay, the gentleman that just talked, that's what I referenced. the $25 million that's going against litigation with Trump. The point is to get rid of Trump. He should have not have been on the ballot. The Supreme Court made a sloppy, incorrect decision. The National Constitution Center, nonpartisan, concluded that 3 days after the March 4th thing. A guy from the Heritage Foundation at Stanford and a guy from the court, Garber, they're historians and experts on this. They said it was garbage. Okay, so let's do it. Okay, this should be point. We want to be consultants on that. Who do we contact to get the consulting contract on that $25 million? I know it was written by Wiener and Gabriel, so please advise. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
We're done for now.
Okay, now we'll move on to, we're back to item number 1. Oh, go on, Wayne, please.
Ross Buckley.
Oh, sorry, Ross.
Needs to report out. Thank you.
Ross, forgive me. Thanks, Wayne. Go ahead, Ross.
No problem. Thanks, Mr. Chair and board members. The legislative and budget session are in full swing here in Sacramento. On the legislative side, the deadline to introduce new bills is next Friday. Currently, we've already seen 656 bills introduced in the Assembly and 380 bills introduced in the Senate. We expect hundreds, if potentially doubling that amount being introduced by next Friday. So we'll keep an eye on that as bills get introduced. Additionally, on the bill side, we've seen already on the announced bills and introduced bills that there's going to be a heavy and significant focus on the response to the California wildfire issue. The Senate has already announced a package of bills that they want to move forward to respond to those issues. We expect a similar package to come from the Assembly as well, designating their priorities on this issue. On the budget side, the Assembly and Senate budget committees have held their first initial overview of the governor's budget. The subcommittee process will begin in the coming weeks, where they'll kind of pull that apart line by line and get into the details. However, there were a couple of major themes that came out of both hearings. The first being that, per your earlier discussion, that any disruption or delay in federal funding would have pretty serious ramifications on our state budget as we look to craft that. The second is that given the obvious need to respond to the Southern California wildfires beyond what we've already allocated in the special session, that will put financial strain on the budget as we look to appropriately respond. And finally, given that the personal income taxes has been delayed to Southern California until October, that will continue to put additional unknowns on the budget as we continue to craft this budget in early spring and into the summer. We won't have a full picture of what the revenues will be coming into the state. So all I have to say is that they are likely to be cautious as they build this budget. That completes my verbal report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ross. Supervisor Perez, any questions? Kurt says no. Okay. Then we'll move on back to item number 1, and that's the concept for 2025 South Coast AQMD sponsored state legislative proposal. A motion is required on this, so let's. You want to report? You got a motion. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Perez raising his hand. Before we take a vote, can we just have a brief report? I know, Lisa, you said there might be some changes in what was written here.
Yes. So good morning, Chair, members of the committee. Just briefly, CARB has an existing emergency response program. It was officially formed in 2009. So it's been about 16 years since that program has really seen a big update. So our concept for this bill is to update that program by augmenting it with additional funding that would also support local air districts' efforts in terms of equipment to be ready and prepared in case an emergency should arise, to create emergency response coordinators throughout the state. We're potentially looking at something like maybe Northern, Central, and Southern California to be able to deploy quickly when something occurs like these devastating wildfires, and also to enhance training and provide training for local air district staff. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions and recommend approval.
Supervisor Hagman, Supervisor Perez, any questions? No. Lisa, the only question I have in Wayne is how would this, if this were to pass, how would this help us in the event there's another wildfire, whether it's in San Bernardino, Riverside, my eastern San Gabriel Valley? How would that benefit us as a response?
So the challenge is in these large urban incidents is it requires a coordination of a number of agencies. And in this particular instance, in the last wildfire incident that we had, what the state determined was that it wasn't able to deploy its own resources, and we do have limited capabilities as well. And so in discussing this challenge amongst the other air districts and the state, some of the state officials, we all thought that pre-deploying resources in key areas throughout the state would be beneficial for a number of different reasons. The concept of having additional mobile platforms at the districts that can support, can utilize, can deploy, can be trained up, would help not only those local districts with utilization of those kind of resources when necessary, but it would provide an ongoing funding stream to deploy more quickly in these kind of instances. And as Lisa said, we were looking at sort of a Northern California zone, a Central California zone, and a Southern California zone. And the concept is to not only look at the deployment and the equipment training aspect, but the integration into Incident Unified Command, both from the state as well as the local district. And I think it would be a more seamless integration if we actually set this program up this way, where we're coordinating right from the onset with the state, and we're coordinating another aspect that we wanted to talk about within this particular effort is the ability to be trained and working in partnership more with the public health agencies. Because it's one thing to have the data, but it's another thing to be able to convey what that data means. And that's been one of the biggest challenges because we have so many different groups and the coordination, I think, has really been challenging. And so this program would help to improve all of those aspects and get resources where they're needed most and give the state the ability to also, by deploying at the districts where the districts have the resource, where the districts have the capability, I should say, and the expertise to move forward. This is something that we've all been thinking about as this whole incident has unfolded before us. And so the concept has been widely positively regarded, and that's why we wanted to move forward, because next week is the last week in which we can introduce legislation.
Kurt, go ahead.
No, lots of background emergency response to the military and the states and different local governments over the years, and that unified command is very important. What we really never thought about when we were fighting a disaster is like, okay, what's the after effects? And now you're going to have EPA, you're going to have different air quality districts, parks and wildlife. I mean, you have everybody involved in the aftermath of these things. Not that you can frankly do a lot about it during the time it's actually going on. You're secondary, but the data collection is important. Who has jurisdiction when it starts going over jurisdictional lines, especially when it comes to air quality. You can have a fire up in my high desert that affects the residents down here, for example, or what we saw on the East Coast where Canada was basically affected all Northeast. Not that, again, you can prevent that, stop that, but what this bill would do is help the training, and the training is important. Tabletop exercise, incident command, who has what responsibilities, what kind of resources there, identify those resources. A lot of the tabletops I did in the past, there's a whole slew of, for example, California Army Corps, I mean, not Army Corps, but military department assets. We hear about the helicopters, but when I worked at the Santa Barbara floods, we had to bring high water mark vehicles in to take residents who did not leave when we told them to leave, and to go out and rescue them because the local police didn't have any high weather vehicles that could go with the floodplains. So there's a whole bunch of, just the awareness is important. So the training is one thing. The budget year coming up, asking for a bunch of equipment, may not. And the only advice I have for the authors of the bill, and Phil took my spot and he's a good friend, but maybe a policy, one thing for training, another thing for equipment.
Yeah.
Because of the state budget, the next cycle, no matter, it's not gonna be rosy. It's not gonna be for a couple of years. They really did pinch every line they could to pass last year's budget. Now you throw on all the other needs of the cleanup in LA and the World Cup and the Olympics. They're gonna be tight for a while. So that if the purchase price gets too big, you may not get the policy, but that training is real important just to have the knowledge of what the equipment we have right now.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, one of the other aspects, because we're looking at 3 zones within the state, would be mutual aid within those zones. So like, for instance, we already provide assistance to like San Diego when requested. We would obviously provide assistance to Mojave or other Ventura. So that's part of what we're trying to help define on how we move forward, but exactly what Supervisor Hagman just said.
Great. Supervisor Perez, any questions or comments on this one? Okay. Before we vote, we'll take a public comment. Harvey? Bay, how much time does he have on this?
Leave 51 seconds
Thank you, Harvey. We've got
approximately.
just under a minute. Go ahead, Harvey.
Good morning. Hello, am I being heard?
Yes.
Yes.
please.
Okay, I want to ditto my introductions. Okay. I want to incorporate by reference early 2 o'clock in the morning yesterday or day before that they added for City of Santa Monica City Council meeting. We testified, want to incorporate our comments by reference. There is required for planning to have a safety plan, and that includes climate, it includes heat, it's stuff with these fires. Okay, Santa Ana winds were 80 to 100 miles an hour. This is a drought that caused this, and it's climate, and it could come back anytime. Also, they talked about an earthquake. We had an 8.3 earthquake in Fort Tejon in 1857. In 1906, San Francisco had a big earthquake, and they burnt to the ground. PG&E put in power lines, and gas lines, they exploded. It's the same thing here. This has got to be part of that. It's got to be in.
Thank you, Harvey. And my only comment is, Lisa, as you look for authors, I know you're working with people right now, coordinate with me so I can work with my local state senator, Sasha Perez, and then Assemblyman who's just north of me, but a good friend, former Sierra Madre Mayor John Herbedian, and also Nick Schultz in Burbank, who's a former Attorney General with me. We'll take the vote now. There's no more public comment. Maria, will you take the roll? And this is to support the item motion made by Supervisor Hagman, second by Supervisor Perez.
Thank you. Mayor Locke Dawson, absent. Supervisor Hagman. Supervisor Perez.
Aye.
Councilmember Rahman, absent. Councilmember Caccioti.
Yes,
Motion passes 3-0.
thank you. Move on to item other matters. Number 4, other business. Supervisors, any other business? Nope. Manny, no. Wayne? Oh, no other business staff? Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, public comment period. Nobody here in the auditorium. Anybody online like to comment during the public comment period, item number 5? Harvey Etter, and Bay has 3 minutes on this. Harvey, go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm being heard. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, my name's Harvey Etter. I'm the founder and director of Public Solar Power Coalition, and talking for myself and like-minded folks and entities. Okay, what I just said, and I brought this up to you on the record and through the years, that we're way overdue for a major earthquake down here. 8.3 in Fort Tejon. Okay, that's 1857. It's like 170 years. For 3,000 years, every 120 to 150 years, we've had these major quakes here. All right. It's on the wall. It's going to happen. They said there was a 95% in the Santa Monica.
Mr. Etter, please limit your comments to items within the jurisdiction of this legislative committee. Thank you, sir.
Go on, Harvey, focus.
I'm talking in protest. It's a violation of the Brown Act. Not to mean that is rude and inconsistent.
Thank you. We can move
with
on.
Thank you, Harvey. Okay, we'll move to item number 6. The next meeting date is Friday, March 14th, 2025 at 9 a.m. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.